Thank you so much, Peter. It's so wonderful to be here, and particularly wonderful just to meet all of these people that have given me so much support and guidance over the last couple of years. So you all know who you are, and thank you so much for your wonderful, wonderful mentorship. So I've noted that in most presentations, researchers and clinicians stay on their conflicts of interest slide for no longer than a second. What is a conflict of interest, and why is it so important? A conflict of interest is a situation in which a person is in a position to derive personal benefit from actions or decisions made in their official capacity. It's therefore of paramount importance that in any scientific presentation, conflicts of interest are declared, none more so than in the field of nutrition science. Here are my conflicts of interest. My practice has recently received money for our involvement in 3 trials for the treatment of diabetic macular edema. As yet, I have not enrolled any patients. Bayer has supported my attendance at 2 conferences this year, and so I am conflicted. But I'm a huge believer in demedicating and deprescribing patients. In fact, I'm sure Bayer are not happy about the fact that they send me to conferences where I teach my colleagues how they can reduce the number of injections they give to their patients' eyes. I'm also an honorary ambassador for Defeat Diabetes and the Macular Disease Foundation. I have no food industry associations, no religious affiliations, and I'm an omnivore. For nearly 3 years, I've been advocating for a public campaign to raise awareness of the dangers of type 2 diabetes. I've even produced 2 commercials that have played nationally on free-to-air TV, both featuring a working-class Aussie bloke, Neil, who suddenly went blind in both eyes due to his type 2 diabetes. Here's the first that I created in late 2018.
I should have kept my medication up, and I should have followed the plans that were given to me by my doctors. I woke up one morning completely blind. Thought I was dreaming, went back to sleep for an hour, woke up and I was still completely blocked off. My wife's face when we went to bed. That was the last clear image I had.
I'd hoped this hard-hitting story would scare the 1.7 million Australians with type 2 diabetes into having their eyes checked to prevent them from going blind. Although personal stories can be emotive and powerful, they cloud the systemic problem shaping the behaviour of victims such as Neil and undermine the political will to change it. And what is the underlying systemic problem? Our unhealthy food environment, one which is flooded with sugary drinks and highly processed foods, specifically a food environment which is high in sugar. And what is the systemic impact? A chronic disease epidemic, indeed a tidal wave, one which we are now seeing in our kids. An epidemic of tooth decay, obesity, and the big baddie, type 2 diabetes. 100,000 Australians develop type 2 diabetes every year. And Australians are missing 1.2 million days of work due to type 2 diabetes every year. 15,000 Australians die from type 2 diabetes every year. And most of the associated misery, disability and death is avoidable. Australian taxpayers are footing the annual $250 million bill for treatments to avoid the most feared complication of type 2 diabetes, blindness, the complication I deal with every day at work. The $500 million bill for the second most feared complication, amputation. And the $500 million bill racked up by dialysis for kidney failure. The total annual bill for type 2 is estimated by Diabetes Australia to now be in excess of $20 billion. However, if we factor in the critical and often neglected point that type 2 diabetes is a driver of the top killers in our society, heart attack, dementia, stroke and cancer, then I have no doubt the cost to the taxpayer is many-fold higher. Clearly, we need action. In 2020, I devised an action strategy that involves a 3-pronged approach of awareness, accountability and assistance. In 2020, I met with Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt to outline the scope of the problem, the key drivers, and to offer my solution, my action strategy. I also met with the then Shadow Health Minister, Chris Bowen. And I met with South Australian Health Ministers Stephen Wade in 2020 and Chris Picton in 2022. Each time I called for a public awareness campaign to highlight the multitude of life-changing and life-threatening dangers of type 2 diabetes. I called for better education of our children regarding the dangers of sugary drinks and ultra-processed foods. I called for a food labelling system that's clear and transparent and one that's not been hijacked by industry. And I called for better training and resourcing of our army of healthcare practitioners who are dealing with the disheartening fallout every day of their working lives. I'd hoped to have all of this accomplished within my one-term year as Australian of the Year. I was very naive. In 2021, though, my wish appeared to be granted when the Australian Medical Association unleashed its Sickly Sweet campaign. I then read Grant Ennis's brilliant book, Dark PR, How Corporate Disinformation Undermines Our Health and the Environment. And I realised that I'd got much of my advocacy wrong. Thanks to enlightenment from my reading of Dark PR, I now see more clearly. I now realise that calls for initiatives such as these are simply a form of victim blaming. As these initiatives all hinge on providing more information so individuals can make better choices, they divert attention away from the pro-industry policy environment, shifting accountability from laws favouring the sugary drink and ultra-processed food industries to the willpower of everyday Australians, the victims of these harmful policies. Sadly, these efforts don't change population health, they undermine support for policy change, and they reduce the political will for meaningful action. Dark PR unveils a myriad of other framing techniques used by industry to attempt to deceive the Australian public. First, and perhaps most foremost, are lies. Big lies. Blatant lies. Lies enable corporations and the associations that often front them to undermine support for policy change by denying the fact that sugar causes diseases such as tooth decay, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. And they back up their lies by funding studies that manipulate the data in their favour. One eye-opening review paper in 2016 revealed, of the 34 studies that were not sponsored by the sugary drink industry, 33 showed that sugar-loaded beverages are associated with obesity and type 2 diabetes. In contrast, of the 26 studies that were sponsored by industry, none showed a link between sugar-loaded beverages and chronic disease. Surprise, surprise. Industry pollutes the scientific literature on purpose so they can argue the data is inconclusive. And this ultimately undermines support for any change at all. Coca-Cola has been one of the biggest culprits in the dissemination of disinformation, denying their drinks can be dangerous to our health. For years, Coke's annual reports to the US Securities and Exchange Commission listed obesity and its health consequences as the biggest threat to their profits. The sugary drink and ultra-processed food industries counter such threats with intensive marketing and lobbying. These industries also fight public health campaigns with their own devious campaigns. One such campaign is Nestlé's Be Body Positive with Nestlé Fitness. The concerning trend of normalising obesity, amplified by the food and drinks industries, is an injustice to those who suffer from this disease and its many devastating consequences. Only 1 in every 200 people with obesity are metabolically healthy. The normalisation of obesity instills a belief in the population that obesity is not a problem and hence no solution is required. With 2/3 of Australians either overweight or obese, in other words, metabolically unhealthy, it looks as though most of us have fallen for this devious frame. Beyond the lies, corporations employ solutions that generate the appearance of action. Coca-Cola is the founding corporate partner of Exercise is Medicine, a global initiative that perpetuates the message that exercise is the solution to our chronic health problems, backed up by research funded by Coca-Cola. This is reinforced by copious links between the junk food, fast food and sugary drinks industries and sporting clubs, teams and associations. Think Cadbury's sponsorship of the Wallabies rugby union team. And who can forget Kellogg's Ironman food? There's no doubt exercise is important for health. However, the reality is our poor diet is responsible for more disease and death than smoking, alcohol and inactivity combined. The pervasive message to move more and eat less, popularised by industry in their various fronts, is not the answer to our obesity and type 2 diabetes epidemics. Even more concerning is Nestlé's sponsorship of suicide prevention charity Are You OK through sales of their unhealthy confectionery bar KitKat. With 50% of patients with type 2 diabetes suffering from mental health issues, this is a thinly veiled attempt to divert attention away from the fact that ultra-processed consumables are likely contributing to the chronic disease and mental health tidal waves. I met with executives from both Coles and Woolworths during 2020. I expressed my concern regarding their relentless promotion of unhealthy food and drinks at checkouts and at the end of aisles within their supermarkets. They wanted to focus instead on the support provided to a variety of charitable organisations. All well and good. However, I felt that this was nothing more than virtue signalling, particularly if these companies continue in parallel with their predatory marketing and sales behaviour. It's this ruthless behaviour that's driving profits at the expense of our health. Far from curtailing their insidious tactics, I recently discovered a chocolate stand in the fresh food section of Woolworths supermarket in Adelaide, preying on those customers who are trying to avoid the junk food aisles. And shame on you, Woolworths. These companies can and should do better. It's not just the supermarkets that are preying on our addictions, but service stations, post offices, school and office supply stores, and chemists. Chemists? Really? Are they truly protecting the community? I wrote to Officeworks questioning the junk food at their checkout counters. Apparently they have identified the need to include more health products in their impulse range at checkouts. Presently, nearly 3/4 of Officeworks impulse products are unhealthy, and parents have to run the gauntlet of junk food stands as they progress in the queue with their sugar-addicted kids in tow. Watch out, Mum and Dad. More disturbing is that industry is now offering up dietary treatments for obesity and type 2 diabetes at the same time as continuing the subsidised marketing of the very foods and drinks that are responsible for these chronic diseases. A classic example is Optifast, an ultra-processed food-like substance designed for weight loss by Nestlé, a company in which over 60% of its food and drinks portfolio do not meet the recognised definition of health. Nestlé is currently providing Optifast for a study in Sydney to determine whether the substance can put type 2 diabetes into remission. Disturbingly, this study is being supported by local obesity and diabetes associations. Make no mistake, we are being conned. Treatments are being promoted by companies rather than preventive measures that would impact on their profits, and pharmacists, health practitioners and patients alike are falling for it. And then there's Seventh-day Adventist church-owned ultra-processed food giant Sanitarium, providing nutrition fact sheets for the public, teachers and health professionals. They also claim to be the biggest provider of corporate wellness programs in Australia through their Vitality Works platform. As Belinda Fettke states, imagine a processed food industry owned by a church with devout beliefs on diet, providing health and wellness to Australian companies and involved in shaping policy guidelines to our government. We also see combination of these devious strategies framing the public health crisis as multifactorial or complicated. The Australian non-alcoholic beverage industry's recent sugar reduction pledge is one such tool from the devious framing toolbox of the sugary drink industry. The pledge utilises a multifactorial strategy that harnesses a number of activities with dubious efficacy. These include nutritional literacy programs and funding for companies that frame obesity as an individual issue instead of the public health issue that it is. Both of these activities have been proven ineffective. As Grant Ennis puts it, the argument that these approaches that don't work in isolation would work when combined is a scam. The sugar reduction pledge makes the non-alcoholic beverage industry appear to be working for the public good when it's unlikely to be having any impact at all. Such a tool distracts us all from more tightly regulating an industry that's harming our health. The reality is the reduction in sugar of less than 1 gram per 100 mils still leaves the average drink with 5 grams of sugar per 100 ml of liquid, a level that's dangerously high. Sadly, this initiative is destined to fail in solving our public health crisis. What's worse, it will dilute political will for real change. Further, only 4 out of over 70 members of the Australian Beverages Council have committed to the voluntary pledge. Another example of devious framing can be found on Nestlé's Know More About Diabetes webpage, where it states the main reason behind acquiring diabetes is genetic. There's been a 4-fold increase in type 2 diabetes globally over the past 4 decades, in one generation, and an 80-fold increase amongst Australia's First Nations people. This is not due to genetics. Genetics may load the gun, but diet pulls the trigger. The illusion that innovative genetic therapies will be the solution to obesity and type 2 diabetes once again clouds the policies promoting our unhealthy food environment. A levy on sugary products has been shown in many countries to both reduce purchase and consumption. However, it's a strategy that's been successfully demonised by industry and is not palatable for either of our government's major parties. Opponents and lobbyists accuse governments of enforcing nanny state policies. But the disturbing reality continues. The nanny is killing us. Lobbyists from the food and drink industries persuade our governments to subsidise operating costs to the tune of trillions of dollars each year, thereby lowering the cost of their products and increasing consumption. Grant Ennis proposes that rather than making an unpopular appeal for more taxes, we should rally to the cause of ending subsidies. According to public health education group Live Lighter, in Australia, food companies receive subsidies that are contrary to public health outcomes from both state and federal governments. While recent discussions around Australia's taxation system have canvassed several unsatisfactory proposals, such as removal of the GST exemption on basic foods, costs incurred by the junk food industry associated with advertising, marketing and sponsorship are tax deductible. In this respect, Australian taxpayers are subsidising the advertisements for junk food and sugar-sweetened beverages, which is effective in encouraging us to buy more of these products. Food companies may also be eligible to receive the Aussie Industry Research and Development Tax concessions, which allow a tax deduction of 125% of the company's R&D expenditure. Federal and state governments in Australia also subsidise the industrialised food system through payment of hidden costs. Companies produce unhealthy food and drinks, profit from their sale, and leave governments to pay the astronomical healthcare costs of the resulting chronic disease burden. Dark PR lays out the shocking scale of industry subsidies at a global level, but I wanted to understand better how these kinds of subsidies look in Australia. Together, Grant and I delved into the issue. We took the 2019-20 tax data provided in an ABC online news article and compared what these food and sugary drink companies should have paid in taxes to what they actually paid after tax breaks. The results were disturbing. Through a plethora of tax breaks, many of the largest food companies paid essentially 0% in taxes. This means we are incentivising them to make us sick through our tax code. According to the data we uncovered, Coca-Cola alone costs Australian taxpayers over $1 billion each year in lost tax revenue. In total, the sugary drink and ultra-processed food industries receive nearly $5 billion each year in Australian tax subsidies. This lost revenue means the cost of production of sugary drinks and ultra-processed foods is cheaper, effectively lowering the cost of these products, the very opposite of a sugar tax. This is outrageous. I can do it live. It's time for our government to act, to end the harmful policies driving the avoidable chronic disease epidemics that are causing such misery to Australians and their families. We need to beat the industry lobbyists at their own game. We must organise as citizens and advocate for policymakers to change these deadly laws. In the meantime, let's look again at my action strategy for some guidance. Firstly, awareness. The Australian public needs to be made aware that sugar is highly addictive, and we often use it to alleviate stress. That sugary products are cheap, highly accessible, and often targeted at our kids. that 3/4 of our consumables have added sugar. And finally, that we're being bombarded by advertisements for sugary products, sometimes in the most insidious of ways. And once again, our precious kids bear the brunt of these targeted campaigns. We also need far-reaching accountability. Firstly, accountability with respect to the preventability of type 2 diabetes, and that there's no evidence we can prevent the disease with our current high carbohydrate eating pattern, a pattern that's endorsed by our Australian dietary guidelines, a document that's outdated and one that's been biased and shaped by industry influence, and yet one that's being used by teachers to educate our kids, and is being used by cooks to inform what should be prepared and eaten in childcare, aged care, prisons, the armed forces and our hospitals. It also informs our army of health practitioners, health educators and government health policy makers. The Royal Australian College of GPs Management of Type 2 Diabetes Handbook, released in 2020, advises eating according to the Australian Dietary Guidelines for optimum management. Even Diabetes Australia echoes this advice in the Eating Well section of their website. We recommend people follow the Australian Dietary Guidelines. Type 2 diabetes is a disease of carbohydrate intolerance, and yet Australians, including those with this disease, are being told to eat foods that are high in carbohydrates. It makes no sense to me, and I'm sure it makes no sense to all of you sitting here today. Our dietary guidelines discourage the eating of foods containing natural saturated fats, and this has in turn led to the production of thousands of low-fat products, many of which are highly processed and loaded with sugar and refined carbohydrates to enhance the flavour lost by removing fat. The guidelines claim that the link between dietary saturated fat and cardiovascular disease is well established. However, there's no evidence whatsoever to link whole-fat dairy, unprocessed red meat and eggs with heart attack, stroke and type 2 diabetes, foods that have been demonised by our guidelines since their inception. This lack of evidence was well known in 2009 when the last review commenced. This critical piece of evidence was seemingly ignored. And once again, this advice continues to be echoed by a multitude of health associations and organisations, including the Royal Australian College of GPs, Diabetes Australia, Dietitians Australia, Nutrition Australia and the Australian Heart Association. Instead of promoting healthy saturated fats, the Australian dietary guidelines and these various bodies encourage the eating of unhealthy polyunsaturated oils. And this in turn has led to the boom in production and consumption of margarines and seed oils, industrially produced fats which have been linked to cardiovascular disease. And these bodies must stop demonising meat, especially red meat. After all, an extensive review published in the Annals of Internal Medicine in 2019 showed us there's no evidence to make public health recommendations to limit red and unprocessed meat. We also need accountability with respect to the potential reversibility of type 2 diabetes. I only learned about this extraordinary opportunity in early 2020 when I read Jason Fung's wonderful book, The Diabetes Code. It was a revelation to me. I always thought of type 2 diabetes as a progressive disease. Indeed, Diabetes Australia was reinforcing this pervasive message. Fortunately, as a result of my inclusion in the expert advisory group for the Australian Diabetes Strategy, we now have the opportunity for remission of type 2 diabetes in our national policy for the first time ever. And Diabetes Australia and some of the other diabetes associations have recently softened their communication regarding progression of type 2. There's still a long way to go, and many other associations need to follow suit. There are 3 clinically proven methods that can potentially put type 2 into remission: bariatric surgery, very low-calorie diets, and low-carbohydrate diets. However, why would one operate on a normal healthy organ or offer a patient ultra-processed nutrient-deficient products when an enjoyable and sustainable option is readily available utilising real food? Food that is low in non-essential, nutrient-poor refined carbohydrates and rich in healthy essential fats and satiating proteins, and with over 100 controlled clinical trials to reinforce its efficacy and safety. We also need to see accountability from businesses that prey on our addiction to sugar. from businesses and their industry allies that prey on the vulnerable and on our kids, and from our governments and city councils who allow this type of predatory marketing to continue everywhere in our diabolical food environment. We need to see accountability from medical schools and universities that offer vending machines packed with sugary products. I wrote to Adelaide University in 2020 requesting they remove their heavily sugared products from their campus vending machines. They did oblige me and have trialled 2 units with healthy choices. I've recently learnt that revenue is about 50% less than adjacent machines, and the contracting body is reluctant to roll out the concept further. As always, it's profit over health, even in our major health bastions. We need to see accountability from hospitals that continue to serve up carb-heavy meals to patients in cardiac, stroke and vascular wards. This was actually breakfast for my mum last year when she was admitted. We need to see accountability at schools where junk food is regularly used to raise funds, or is being sold in tuck shops and canteens by private contractors. Surely it's time to start a healthy lunch program at all schools across the country. In fact, I'm excited to be launching next month the Healthy Lunch program at Annesley School in Adelaide, harnessing the expertise of maestro chef Duncan Velgamot of Africola fame. We need to see accountability at sport clubs that use fast food to reward their star players. And we need to stop the relentless promotion of junk food to our kids on TV and social media. Finally, we need assistance. Medical students need assistance. They need an unbiased training and strong evidence-based methods to both prevent and reverse chronic disease using nutrition rather than medication, by using real food as medicine. I was fortunate to deliver a presentation recently about type 2 diabetes to fourth-year students at Adelaide Medical School, however was warned that I could not promote any specific dietary approach. I therefore highlighted the 3 therapeutic carbohydrate restriction options detailed in Abbott's booklet, Beating Diabetes with Food: Mediterranean, vegetarian, low carb. Doctors need assistance. They have the time, financial incentives and resources to be able to provide this critical information to their patients. Fortunately, there are plenty of resources out there. From the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, clinical guidelines for implementing therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, and another from the American Diabetes Association. And right here in Australia, a state-by-state directory of skilled practitioners on the Low Carb Down Under website. And of course, there's Peter Bruckner's excellent Defeat Diabetes platform for those who want to go it alone. 1 year ago, Diabetes Australia released its position statement on type 2 diabetes remission. However, it's a pessimistic document that far from celebrates or encourages the extraordinary opportunity afforded by remission. They are yet to respond to my critique of this document. I'm once again highly concerned that vested interests lie at its heart. I've been calling on Dietitians Australia to reveal their position on remission of type 2 diabetes. They boast being Australia's leading voice in nutrition. 2 of the 3 clinically proven methods for putting type 2 into remission involve dietary change. Surely then, this is the body that can have the most powerful impact in reversing the type 2 diabetes epidemic in Australia. I've been pushing Dietitians Australia to release a position statement. Their answer to me 8 months ago was, "We will continue on a path dictated by our timeline, not yours." With perhaps 10,000 deaths due to type 2 diabetes since that correspondence and over 250 new cases developing in this country every day, surely the path should be dictated by our patients and their families, many of whom are suffering terribly.
To Papa, you are the best papa in the world, and have a happy Christmas. Love from Anya.
Our health associations and institutions need assistance to reduce their reliance on funding from the pharmaceutical, sugary drink and processed food industries. to remove the vested interest shaping our food environment and its resulting chronic disease epidemic. Patients with type 2 diabetes need assistance, to have subsidised access to nutritionists and dietitians and other practitioners well versed at prescribing therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, and to understand through CGM the potential impact of cereals, grains, starchy vegetables, fruit and processed foods on their blood sugar level. And for people from lower socio-economic areas need assistance, to have access to real food at affordable prices rather than rely on the cheap, addictive and alluring sugary products that reign supreme in their suburbs. I'm excited to announce to you all today that work has been progressing over the past year on Australia's very first network for systematic impact to halt and hopefully turn around our type 2 diabetes epidemic. A network of like-minded individuals and entities passionate about systemic change, passionate about big change, a change that will ultimately make Australia type 2 free. We will, in the coming weeks, be establishing working groups to address the multiple underlying drivers. We will keep you posted. We'll be delighted to have you on board to help us turn the tide. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Inspiring leadership. We've got time for a couple of questions. So if you'd like to jump up to one of the microphones, do you want to...
Oh, there we go. Cindy O'Meara. James, I know that you had a real push to change the dietary guidelines of Australia at a top level. I've always thought about doing it at a ground swelling level. How are you going with that?
Well, I applied to be on the Dietary Guidelines Review Committee, and in the application process there were a bunch of boxes you had to tick, one of which was, have you called out the dietary guidelines on social media or in the public arena? So I did tick it, and lo and behold, I wasn't invited to be a part of the group. I suspect that's probably why. But I think, this is critical. The dietary guidelines are so critical to this process. And a number of us are watching very closely what's going on. We're aware of who's on the working group for that very, very important document. It's not going to be released until 2024, so we're still going to have a lot more misery and death over the next couple of years. But I think what is really needed now is a parliamentary inquiry to actually understand and raise awareness to what actually happened on the previous review back in 2009 through to when they were released in 2013. So that's something that really needs to happen because there was so much bias and industry influence in that document, which is actually driving a continued poor health. So that's going to be one of the things as part of this network for systemic change that we'll be addressing.
Hi James, fantastic presentation. I'm Deepa, I'm a doctor in Sydney, and I'm also a mother of a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. And they've grown up on a low carbohydrate diet. As I've seen my 6-year-old enter school, it is a massively challenging, toxic food environment, which I couldn't agree with you more in that the slides there about schools, and even terrible in daycares in terms of what they feed our children. I'd like to know more about the healthy eating program and what that looks like and how more of us can become involved in that movement.
So that's just something I've been talking about with Annesley School. You mean that there's been a small group of us just working on that, and we're going to launch it next month. And we want to just do a trial, a model of that, and see how it goes. But I know there's some great work being done in Tasmania as well and in New Zealand around healthy lunch programs. I'll keep you posted. It's really in its infancy, and it'll be interesting to see how that's taken up. But yeah, the culture in schools is terrible. I'm actually meeting with the Department of Education in the next couple of weeks to talk about it, because basically schools are just flaunting what's advised in the various policies for what should be served to kids at school. They're just being completely ignored, and so there needs to be some accountability within many of the schools that are just flaunting these policies. So that's a critical thing that needs to happen as well. And then, of course, you have kids bringing chocolate cakes and chocolates and lollies and things for birthdays, and it goes on and on and on. So there needs to be a lot of work done in that respect, and that will form another working group within this Network for Systemic Change. So all of these things, I mean, there's so many things, as you can see, that need to be addressed. Not one tax, not one food label, not one of these things of its own will actually have the change that's needed. We actually have to weave all of these elements together to create this really powerful impact, and all at once.
Hi, James. My name is Ellis and I'm a GP. Please keep up the good work that you're doing. Now, when you raise your voice against these big companies, have they in some form expressed their displeasure to what you've been raising?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, some of them, I've had some nasty letters from Diabetes Australia and Dietitians Australia, as you can imagine, but the not from the food industry or the sugary drinks industry, interestingly, because I think when that happens, it actually then focuses a spotlight on it, which is not ultimately good for them. So I think they've remained very, very quiet, really, over the last couple of years. I was expecting more of a backlash, but I suspect that will ramp up. Some of the information which I shared with you today, I'm about to release in an opinion piece, and I suspect that'll receive a lot of attention. But no, fortunately not from that group. But I suspect indirectly, I've had a lot of trolling on social media, and I suspect there are people from those industries, particularly tasked with the task of trying to silence me and to confound the messages that I've been giving. And I'm sure many of those who've been active on social media have had similar experiences as well.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Loud.
I'm a diabetes educator from the Gold Coast, but I actually use some of the resources from other diabetes groups in other states. And Adelaide just put out their most revised September food guidelines. It's basically everything opposite to what we're trying to tell our patients. And it's all about including carbohydrates with every meal, choose the best fats and avoid only a bit of lean meat. And these have just been revised like last month. There's been no change at all. We've been trying to push it. I've been trying to get low carb into our Australian Diabetes Educators conferences. And oh no, we don't need to know about that. It's just horrid. It's just, so basically, I get a lot of low carb patients, but no one else will.
I've tried to present at the conference multiple times and been rejected.
Yeah.
I think just shut down too. There you go.
Yeah, it's troubling, isn't it? And I've had a number of meetings with Diabetes SA, and they seem to be in agreement with what I'm saying, but then they go and release these guidelines. I haven't actually seen them. But again, they're all towing the line. They're all following the guidelines. And as Pan said this morning, people fear treading outside the guidelines because then you run the risk of being deregistered as a doctor or worse. So there is a real fear of stepping outside the guidelines, and so it's going to be very interesting to see. This is why the dietary guideline review is so critical, that it has to literally flip its recommendations. And will they do that? It's hard to know, but I think we need to call it out and continue to keep on calling it out.
Thank you, James, and we really congratulate you on what you're doing, and thank you very much.